Hello, good morning, and welcome back, friends, to a new episode of World War One, featuring Mr. D'Amico and you, my great freshman. So this is video number 5, and we are pretty close to winding down and being done with World War One. So I think there's going to be today's video, probably another one coming up this week, and then we'll do some sort of assessment on it and we'll be done with it. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to spend as much time on World War II just because of the circumstances of the year, but we're just about wrapping up. We're slowly coming to an end of World War I here. So I hope you guys had a great Memorial Day weekend. Hope it was restful and fun and safe. And today we're going to dive in. Now, guys, don't forget that today is part 2 of your quiz, right? So last class we did, video 4, which was you guys answered the questions with it, and that was going to be your first half of your first quiz grade. So today's questions and today's video will be the second 50 points, the second half of the quiz grade. We'll combine them both, and you guys know the drill by now. That will turn into your first quiz grade of this winding fourth marking period. Okay, so we're on World War One. It's obviously been our topic. We have mentioned, I don't need to do a review again, but we talked about the aerial warfare. We recently talked about it widening and the failure of the Gallipoli campaign. The Allies are trying their best to resupply Russia, but it fails. The World at War, how everybody gets involved in total war. And this is where we left off Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, where they said we are going to sink whatever boats go around England, really around the the North Sea, you can call it, North Atlantic. Basically, any boats, if you're Germany, this is Germany speaking, any boats we see that we don't recognize, this is your warning. We're shooting you. We're gonna use our U-boats, use our submarines, and we are going to take you out. So is it okay for countries to do that? And totally cut off the war and the water path, I guess you can say, the right of people to travel across the ocean. I mean, I don't know, but this is certainly what Germany did, and it was really controversial. So as we talk about the war shifting from land and becoming more prominent at sea, this was a big thing to know, Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare. And they warned Americans. Remember, I showed you guys the picture where they warned and they said, hey, dear Americans, dear everybody, just to let you know, there's a war going on, as if everybody didn't already know. There's a war going on, so just be careful. If you take an Atlantic voyage, there's a war going on and something might happen to you. So they did warn people, Germany did, but they're about to make a fatal mistake, and this is the fatal mistake. That ship probably looks a lot like a ship that we're all familiar with, called the Titanic. Oddly enough, World War I goes from 1914 to 1918. Oddly enough, the Titanic sinking, just to give you guys a little perspective of time, this is not the Titanic. I'm actually going to go forward a little bit to the Titanic. There's the famous picture of the Titanic, or drawing or painting. The Titanic sunk in 1912. Now, that's 2 years before World War I starts, so this really doesn't have anything at all to do with World War I. Just kind of want to give you a time frame and give you an idea of, that time in history that everybody pretty much remembers. But the Titanic sunk the year 1912, 2 years before the war starts. About 1,500 people were unfortunately were dead after this, after the Titanic. Really, really terrible tragedy where it sinks. It takes about 2 hours and 40 minutes for it to sink, so it was excruciating. It was long. Really, really tough time there. Again, about 1,500 people dead. And just to show you the route of the Titanic, because the Lusitania, which is going to be significant to World War I, is going to be the opposite. So the Titanic actually starts off, parts of it were actually made up here in Ireland, in Cobb, and then so basically the Titanic leaves from Europe. It goes from the mainland, then it goes to England or Britain, and then it goes to Ireland, and it's on its way basically to New York. It was going to stop at Halifax as well, and the Titanic, on its way across the Atlantic Ocean, sinks right here, a couple hundred miles off the coast of the United States of New York. So that was a big tragedy, and then it's just so ironic. It's really crazy that a couple years after that, now 3 years after that, there's another passenger ship. Okay, now this is during the war, and it's called the Lusitania. It's actually a British ship, but it does have some Americans on it. There's people from around the world on it. and it's a ship with roughly 12 or 1,300 people on it. And as we discussed, Germans have warned everybody. Now, I don't really know. I probably wouldn't be traveling by boat during World War One. I can't really say because I didn't live then. But if you know a war's going on and you get all these signals and you get all these warnings, I'm probably staying home. I'm probably not going on the seas, especially in this war zone. But people did it. And like how we talked about, the Titanic 3 years earlier went from Europe to the United States, to North America. The Lusitania actually left from New York City. It was a British ship, but it was in New York Harbor. It's got 128. Remember that number? 128 Americans on it. About 1,200 people total, but again, 128 valuable American lives. And it's going again from New York City, and it's actually going into Ireland, and it almost makes it. But this is the area that the Germans warned against. And what did the Germans do? Well, they thought this might be a warship, or they might have ammunition on it. They knew that it was a passenger ship. So let me take back my words about the warship, but they thought maybe there's ammunition on here, and they gave fair warning. I'm not justifying Germans' actions, but what they do is they use their U-boat, which is their submarine, and they torpedo the boat. The Titanic took 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. Most of us have seen the movie, how slowly it did sink quickly, but somewhat slowly into the water. Well, the Lusitania sunk in 20 minutes. It was totally wrecked. It was destroyed. And Germans took the innocent lives of, the exact number is 1,198 people. So that's a lot of deaths, close to, two away from 1,200, and 128 Americans were killed on this trip going from New York into Liverpool, and it sinks right to the south, like we talked about, south of Ireland. Okay. Now the Germans, again, they're claiming that boat had ammunition on it. That boat had weapons on it. It was a secret warship. I mean, yes, it was a passenger ship, and there were innocent civilians on it going on either a vacation or just to travel, right? People used to just use boats as a quick way of transportation instead of flying. You couldn't fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Nonetheless, again, 1,198 innocent people on it. The Germans claim that the boat had ammunition, again, supplies for the war on it that America might have been shipping over to Britain. Now, in the end, or when all is said and done, it is found out, and it actually is confirmed that the Lusitania did have military supplies on it. Now, the Germans did not know for sure. They kind of took a stab in the dark, but still, they did. You could call this murder. I mean, they still killed 1,200 innocent people. And this really ticks off the Americans who really wanted to stay away from the war. For the most part, America was just kind of, we'll help out financially, we'll send supplies, but we don't really want America, we really don't want to be involved in the war. But this is kind of one of the triggers that really gets America involved. 100, imagine today, God forbid, if 128 American people were killed, as an act of war by, a German. Maybe it might not be a ship, maybe it would be a plane, or maybe someone shot down an American plane, or a British plane with 128 American passengers on. Either way, it would really upset Americans. It would be all around the news, which it was during this time. This is a newspaper from the Times, the New York Times. Lusitania sunk by a submarine, probably 1,260 dead. It was torpedoed twice, actually, sinks in 15 minutes. I said 20. But this is, Americans started to look at this as an act of war. Like, what? We had innocent people. And yes, the Lusitania was secretly, it had some guns, some shells, some ammunition, some military gear on there. But Germans didn't really know that for sure. And, maybe, it was a risky move by them. But this started to lead to anti-German feelings. And people in America started to feel like, what? I think maybe we can start thinking about getting into war, and we could start, maybe mobilizing and starting to discuss it more. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys, was this okay for Germany to do, being that at the end of the day, it was correct. This did have war supplies on it, but again, there was innocent people on it. So maybe this was a way for the Americans or for the British to kind of disguise military transactions, or to hide resupplying and to hide military gear, like I've been saying, or weapons or ammunition, by putting it on an innocent civilian ship. They thought maybe that would be slick and smart to do. But again, the unrestricted submarine warfare, the Germans torpedo it a couple times. And the president at the time, who's the American president at this time? The answer is one of the only presidents who lived in New Jersey for a really long time, for the majority of his life, a guy named Woodrow Wilson. He was, at the time, people really liked him. He served 2 terms, I believe from 1913 to 1921. So he served, the 8 years, 2 terms. He was the World War I president. He winds up writing something called the 14 Points after the war. But he reaches out in total anger and disgust to Wilhelm II of Germany, and he gives him hell, and he yells at him, and he says, "This is unfair. Why would you do something like this? And he really protests, and he gets very angry. Obviously, if this happened today, Donald Trump or whoever the president would be is now Mr. Trump. He would reach out, and he would he'd be very, very upset at a country that killed and took 128 American lives, 1,200 total lives. So Woodrow Wilson reaches out, and actually what the Germans do is they remove their, I'll go back a little bit. They remove their unrestricted submarine warfare, and they say, okay, we'll kind of relax our restrictions, our policy, our ideas, and we'll be a little bit more lenient with ships from now on. And it's kind of like a half, apology to the Americans. Like, oops, sorry, we took 128 of your lives. My bad. We won't do it again. But again, it really upsets American people. Now, as World War I goes on, the Germans actually, they get desperate. Okay, remember, it's not just the Germans. The Germans, we've been talking about a lot in today's lesson, but remember, it's the Central Powers, right? So it's the Ottoman Empire as well. It's Austria-Hungary. It's the Central Powers. They start to get a little bit desperate, and in 1917, 2 years after the Lusitania is sank, they actually bring back their policy, their unrestricted submarine warfare, and they bring it back kind of as a last-ditch effort to try to end the war, to try to tighten restrictions. Think about why Germany might do this, because maybe they're worried about Britain resupplying themselves from the Americans or from other people. So they actually get rid of it for a little bit under 2 years, their unrestricted submarine warfare, and then they bring it back 3 years into the war in 1917, much to America and specifically Woodrow Wilson's total disgust. It's back now, so this is a big act of war, and Britain, decided they're going to take the risk. They're going to do it. Germany is going to take the risk. They're going to do it, and they're going to start, to take ships out again and really try to control. This is their idea of control. This is their idea of power. This is their idea of a risky power move that they're going to get after here in 1917. Okay. So next, why am I showing you the Mexican War? The Mexican War was fought about 80 years, a little bit, 70, 80 years before World War I. Why is this important? So we're going to take a step back right now, and we're going to focus on America's involvement here. But America obviously wasn't always as big as it is, okay? We started off with, not to bore you to death here, but we started off with the 13 colonies, right? And then we started to expand westward very slowly. America took the Northwest Territory, which at that time was like the Ohio, Indiana, Illinois area. Then America slowly got the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and slowly they expanded west. But about a third of what the United States is today used to belong to who? It's right on your screen here. Used to belong to Mexico. Okay, this whole area here, where California is, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, a lot of, including Texas as well. Most of this, what today in America would be the Southwest of America, used to belong to Mexico. And there was, about, again, 70 years before World War I, there was a Mexican War where the Americans defeated the Mexicans and basically took a lot of their land. Now, why is this important? Okay. This is important because we just talked about how Germany now and the Central Powers were starting to get desperate, right? They're starting to get desperate. They bring back the unrestricted submarine warfare. Now they're going to take it a step even further, okay? And they're starting to get concerned that America might be joining the war soon. So they want to find a way to preoccupy America, to try to get America to not be able to help out as much on the continent of Europe in the war. And they actually try to get America to, if they're going to come into the war, fight a war on two fronts, have to fight a war on two sides. So what did the Germans do? The Germans send one of the most famous telegrams in all of world history. It's called the Zimmermann Telegram. The Zimmermann Telegram, named after this German man. Sorry, this is like an awkwardly zoomed in picture of him. Arthur Zimmermann. Arthur Zimmermann. He's German. And this man, along with some other German officials, writes this telegram. And he writes this letter to Mexico. You don't have to read the letter. If we were in class, I have a pretty fun primary sources on it, but I'll have to save it for next year. This telegram basically states, it's a letter, so bear with me here. It's a letter from Germany to Mexico. The letter basically says, from Germany, once again, "Dear Mexico, okay, we know that years ago you lost territory. The Americans stole your land." It even says right here, they stole Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. "We need your help, Mexico. If you get involved in the war, if you help us fight against the American people, if you kind of distract them to the south, you can attack them, you could give us supplies, you can do whatever you want, Mexico. If you help us out here, if you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. We, Germany, will help you to reconquer all that territory that you lost." So again, Texas, New Mexico, California, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, that whole, what makes up the Southwest of America today. Germany says, you know what, you help us. If you fight America right now, we'll get you that land back. We got your back. Okay. Now, it's crazy to think about what could have happened in world history if no one ever found out about this telegram, if it wasn't intercepted. Okay. So unfortunately for the Germans, for Arthur Zimmermann, what happens is it gets intercepted. Okay. The letter gets, or the telegram gets, thank goodness for some British technology at the time and American technology, but the British actually intercept it, meaning they are able to get access to this telegram kind of while it's in transport. And they read it and they say, "Hey, America, you might want to see this. Germany is trying to get Mexico to take you over, to conquer you, to get involved in the war." Okay. So it gets decoded, and this is kind of the last straw. This is kind of the end of America's neutrality. Okay. At this point, America 2 years ago already had the Lusitania sunk. Slowly but surely, the American people, the American population is starting to support the war. Also, Americans had a really close tie culturally to England, even though, 200 years before this, America broke away, or 150 years before this, America broke away from England. America at this time did have a lot of friendship, alliance, cultural relationship with Britain. People felt a tie to them. So people did want to support it. But now the Lusitania, the total war, the war is progressing. And then the Zimmermann telegram, right? Can you imagine if a country today, call it even like, maybe North Korea or something. Can you imagine there was news, you turn on the TV and it's like, North Korea asks Mexico to bomb the United States? Like, we would be pretty mad at North Korea, and we'd be pretty mad at Mexico too, even though Mexico wasn't necessarily involved yet. But this Zimmermann telegram was somewhat of the last straw. And if you're Americans, if you're Woodrow Wilson, I don't think you really have a choice at this point. I think it's time for war after this Zimmermann telegram. And this, again, news was put, today it would be on TV, it would be on the radio, probably on social media, probably everywhere, right, on your phones, wherever. But the newspapers were have a lot of information spread. And this happens in late February, early March. And then this is published, Germany plots against the U.S., and they called it the Zimmermann letter at the time. And there were specific instructions in there. So at this time, if you read this, people were like, you know what, let's go. Let's hop into war. So between the Lusitania, so, if anyone asked you, just so you guys know for the future, why did America get involved in World War I? And there's a lot of other, backlying reasons here, but it's the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, the Zimmermann telegram in 1917, and eventually on April 2nd, 1917, the Americans officially declare war on Germany and on the Central Powers, and America's full resources. Remember, we talked about total war, everything. America is now fully involved in the war. And I realized this morning when I was preparing for this lesson that they declared war on April 2nd, one day after. It's an easy way to remember, one day after April Fool's Day. So I guess they didn't want to declare war on Germany on April Fool's Day, because they would have just been like, just kidding. But no, this is a very serious time, clearly. But April 2nd, 1917 is when war is declared. And now we have America involved with about a year left in the war total. Okay. So last topic. There is President Wilson. Our last topic is actually going to be the Spanish flu. But anyway, people really adored Woodrow Wilson. He's come under a little bit of scrutiny or criticism of late because of his stance on civil rights in general and women's rights. But, at the time being, people generally supported President Woodrow Wilson. He was born in Virginia. He was actually the governor of New York for a while, and I think he was like the superintendent or the leader of Princeton University. So he's a Jersey guy. He's one of the few presidents who really lived in Jersey and spent a lot of time in New Jersey. And I went to Monmouth University. I know some of you guys have expressed interest in there. I know you guys are young. But there's a building actually at Monmouth University. This actually looks fake. It's real, I promise. It's called Wilson Hall. And it's actually where his summer home was. It's in West Long Branch, New Jersey. But Woodrow Wilson, again, president for 2 terms from 1913 to 1921. He's the World War I president. And people really liked him because he kept America neutral for a long time. He kept Americans safe and he kept us out of the war. But if you're Woodrow Wilson, your hands were kind of tied here and you were kind of pushed into the war. With, again, the sinking of the Lusitania, 128 Americans dead, the Zimmerman telegram, Mr. Wilson here, I don't think really has much of a choice. But here comes America. America's in this. This is a British piece of propaganda. We'll talk about propaganda next week or a little bit this week as well. But, Americans start to ration everything from food and from butter and, everything you can think of, to shoe leather to, every single thing you could think of. Remember, total war, okay? And here's our last topic, which is so ridiculously ironic. And why do we study history? For so many reasons. We could learn so much from history. But if you don't believe history repeats itself, I think you're crazy, okay? And 1918, 102 years ago from right now, okay, from what we are experiencing, things seem to happen, a lot of things seem to happen at the same time over history. There is something that happens, a huge worldwide epidemic called the Spanish flu. It was actually called influenza, but it got the nickname the Spanish flu. This was going on. I just want to show you simultaneously what was happening also with World War I. But the Spanish flu is this terrible flu that swept across the entire world. So similar to the COVID-19, to coronavirus epidemic that we are experiencing right now. And the similarities are striking. And if you think what we are living through right now is really bad, the Spanish flu that was going on literally during World War I was much worse. So the Spanish flu, there was no vaccines for it, just like there's no vaccines for the COVID-19 virus right now. But there was actually no flu vaccinations until I think like 1935 or 1940, somewhere around there. I think it's 1940. But I have some statistics here on the influenza virus here. Let's see. So just so you know, so far right now on, what is today, May 26, 2020, there's been from COVID worldwide about 350,000 deaths. So 350,000 deaths worldwide, 350,000 right now. And that's a ton of people. Right now for COVID-19, it's tragic. It's terrible, right? The number for the Spanish flu, how many people died worldwide from this epidemic, from the influenza epidemic, Spanish flu of 1918? Remind you one more time, COVID was right now 350,000. 50 million people. 50 million people died from the Spanish flu. So that would be, I don't know, 100 times more people. No, more than 100 times more people. So you can literally, I'm going to take a calculator out for this because Clearly, my math skills are inferior. 350K. I mean, it's well over 100 times worse. So again, take the COVID deaths, multiply by like 120 or 100 whatever. That's how many people died of the Spanish flu, how serious it was. It actually wound up infecting about 500 million worldwide, which at that point was like a third of the whole world's population. So I just want to show you that history does repeat itself, and this was a global pandemic. It was terrible. I mean, it's unbelievable. This is like one of the posters or signs they put up. They were telling people to wear masks. Businesses started to close. Business hours changed. People were urged to not to. They didn't use the word social distance, I don't think, but they were urged to stay away from each other if you could. It says there's no medicine that will prevent it. Keep away from public meetings. Keep your mouth and nose covered. If a member of the household becomes ill, put him by himself. Wear a mask before entering the room. I mean, it is just the similarities between the Spanish flu and between the COVID-19 epidemic is just striking. And all of this happening, during World War I, to the end stage of the World War I. So you could just think that this great war, but also everybody around the world somewhat together was also fighting this war on this terrible epidemic as well. So a lot going on during this time, just mass destruction, lots of deaths. Really sadly, they used to hold mass funerals where there would be dozens of people buried in large holes, and orphanage was running rampant at this time. Similar to COVID-19, the older you were, if you were immunocompromised, a little bit older, a little bit weaker, your immune system, you were more susceptible to it. But I bet you if you did a layover between this picture right here and between some of the different COVID sites from today that are helping to treat the people, even though it's getting better now, you would find so many similarities. So history, it's wild, insane how history repeats itself, and I'm just throttled by this. I'm just taken back by how similar, everything I read about the Spanish flu. It was definitely more intense, more rampant, a lot more deaths. We discussed the math on that, but again, something going on while all this is happening in World War I. Okay. And that is it for today's Tuesday lesson. So guys, I think there's one video left. We're going to talk about some propaganda, how Russia eventually pulled out of the war, the armistice, which is pretty much the end of the war, and then its legacy. How many people were unfortunately killed and wounded, what changed after the war, and who won the war, and that's the end of the PowerPoint. And then we'll eventually get into how World War I transitions, not directly, but slowly, indirectly, into World War II. Okay? Hope you learned a lot. It's going to be part 2 of your quiz. Very, very speedy review here. So today we talked about U-boats, Germans' unrestricted submarine warfare. We talked about the sinking of the Lusitania, the passenger ship, 128 Americans dead, slowly pushing America to war. Coincidentally, the Titanic sunk 2 years or 3 years before as well, just to give you some historical background and put yourself on a timeline here. Then the Mexican War, which was way earlier than World War I, but the Zimmerman telegram from Germany to Mexico saying, we're going to get you back, we're going to get your land for you if you help us. It gets intercepted, and Woodrow Wilson brings America into war. And then the unfortunate Spanish flu that's going on simultaneously to World War I. Okay, so that is it. So have an awesome. I will post this up for you, and that will be it. All right. So if you guys have any questions, freshmen, your grades are totally up to date. So check on them, see how you're doing. Reach out if you need anything. If you want to make up any assignments, reach out, let me know. I'll gladly open them for you and help you guys get to the finish line of this year. Okay. So have a great day. Enjoy your week. Short week, only 4 days this week. And we'll talk soon. Okay. Take care, guys. Bye.